Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mass MAGA Podcast. It's the June 2025 edition, Season 1, Episode 4. And we have a wonderful guest today by the name of Geoff Diehl. He'll go through his background in just a moment or two, but basically he's a former candidate for governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as well as a state committeeman, which is part of the Mass GOP. So welcome, Geoff. How you doing?
Great, David. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, this is going to be a nice chat. So, the objective, just for people joining us, the objective of Mass MAGA, very simple, is to educate, motivate, and encourage people to participate in the political process here in Massachusetts. So, we try to have guests that are literally getting their hands dirty on a daily basis, helping everyone to be successful. So, Geoff, maybe we could just start out like, how did you get started in the political space? Maybe give us a little bit of background.
Well, it's funny because I never thought I was going to run for office. I was 40 years old when I ran for state representative for the first time, and I was serving on a local town board on the finance committee. But that really wasn't by design. They were building a brand new school in the town I live in Whitman, and I had two daughters. I have two daughters, and I was curious about the school plans overall. So I started going to school board meetings, and the superintendent said, "Do you want to join the school board?" I said, I'm not sure I want to do that." And so he said, "Well, what about the finance committee?" So he talked to the town moderator, and they appointed me to the finance committee. And so I became the liaison to the Whitman-Hanson Regional School from the Whitman Finance Committee. And that's really where I started to learn a lot about not just the education from the state as far as funding and building projects, but also just being part of finance committee. You learned a lot about what every town department does, which is, fire, police, DPW. I mean, anybody who owns a home in Massachusetts pretty much knows what I'm talking about, is all the bills you get. And then, of course, just everything that the town has to govern, you learn about. And it was through this that, after the town finance committee meetings, we would get together, some of the members, and have a pizza or a beer across the street at this place called Venus. And they'd all grumble about how we had a state rep that wasn't doing enough. He voted with the speaker all the time. He was vice chair of education, but we weren't getting what we needed. And so after a while, and by the way, I was a registered Democrat at this time. After a while, I said, "Well, is anybody going to run against this person?" And nobody said they would. And so I was like, well, maybe, I started thinking about maybe running against him to try to make a difference on Beacon Hill. Anybody I asked, they said, "Oh, it's a part-time legislature. You can, you can do your regular day job, and you can go and vote. And then, sort of just try to balance that time between voting and your day job. You can do it." So I started thinking more about it. And then that was also right around the time, like in '08, when President Obama was running and against John McCain. And that whole, when he said, "We're going to try to redistribute the wealth," that phrase sort of stuck with me in a negative way. I may have been a Democrat, but I was also sort of more of a Kennedy Democrat. I'm an Eagle Scout. I kind of believe in doing a good turn daily, but also, you need to do things, your own individual efforts, sort of make your life. And so I, uh, I was watching the news one night, and Katie Couric was interviewing Sarah Palin, and she took this long pause to answer a question. Sarah Palin did, and they left the edit in there. And I used to work out in LA in television. Again, my background is pretty long, and I don't want to get all into it now. But my wife and I were out in LA for her career, and I was working in production, television production. And I just knew that edit normally would be edited out by courtesy in a news or a regular interview, and they didn't do it on purpose. They left it in to make her look foolish, in my opinion. And that's when I said, wait, I just had this feeling that there was sort of an overall left leaning by the media that was sort of unfair. And so I think after a pretty intense election cycle, I think a lot of people became aware in '08 of the problems going on in DC. That's what led to the Tea Party revolution in 2010, which was the same year I ended up winning my state rep seat. There was a big turnover up on the Massachusetts legislature that cycle, because folks like me just got tired of watching a country sort of go to the left without, any real check or balance by the media. And so that's a long answer to your initial question of what got me started. But what went in there a little bit, and to your point about, encouraging people to run, is you can't force anybody to run. You have to look for the people who I think are becoming aware, like myself back then, and try to encourage them. So, I used to go to sign holdings for other candidates back then before I ended up winning my seat, because when you're holding signs with other people, you can start to learn about why they're upset about what's going on in government, and it can help solidify your own feelings. And then it can also give you some more evidence or information about what's going wrong that maybe you can try to fix. And so, to me, going to help other people who are running for local office and holding signs was the other way. I think I learned a lot about what it means to run, and the motivation to run. So I think those things back in 08, 2010 were kind of what got me started. And I don't want to presuppose your next question, but at some point, I know you'll probably ask about my involvement with Trump, and that was back in 15 when I first saw him. And I saw Trump once I was in office for several years and saw that how difficult it was, even when you get into the system, how it is to change things. I saw Trump as a wrecking ball to a Republican Party that didn't really respond to their base, and to a Washington, D.C. system that was truly the swamp. And so that's what really attracted me to him back then, why I got involved with him. And of course, fast forward to today, and I think you and I would both agree, David, we're living in historic times where I think our country is finally being rescued from going over that cliff that we were headed.
Wonderful. No, I appreciate that background and story. I mean, in terms of how you came up, through the ranks and your motivation. I guess my next question would be like, what do you enjoy most about being in the political space? I mean, there's a lot of things we get upset about, and a lot of crazy things happening. But I think we all want to be happy warriors. I think that's the quote. But what do you like about it at this point?
Well, as you probably again know, David, in life, there is no happiness without failure. You need to understand, what it is to lose, or what it is to not have something, before you can appreciate when you do have it. And so I suppose what I enjoy most now is being sort of in that world where all this effort for the last 15 years, myself and a lot of people in Massachusetts who've been struggling against this system, are finally winning. I mean, we finally have a governor, Maura Healey, who is I think, admitting and showing her total ineptitude in running our state when it comes to safety and immigration, when it comes to energy, when it comes to taxation. I mean, there is nothing she's doing well for our state right now. And I think it's becoming exposed, and it's becoming something that hopefully we have a good candidate to run for. So I guess in 2014, I was sort of the face of a ballot question to stop our gas tax from going up automatically without a vote. And again, not getting into the long history of that, but it was a bad decision by the legislature, because it really would affect middle to low income families the most, because gas is a huge part of their household budget when they get to and from work. Everything you buy is tied to the cost of fuel, because it has to be transported to the market. It just, a lot of things made this indexing of our gas tax a bad idea. So I led a repeal question, and we ended up winning that issue. So those wins were great. When Trump won in 16, it was fantastic, but I watched almost immediately in horror as sort of establishment Republicans were given positions in his administration, because he wasn't aware of the system behind the system that's actually really running things. And so, it's always like every time there's a win, I'm always thinking, oh, but what could go wrong, or what could be. But right now, I actually feel like, other than Massachusetts still having like zero real Republican representation, I do feel very good about where the country's at right now, where we're headed, our position in the world again. I just think we have a president that is transformative and has a vision that I think a lot of us share, which is the original founding vision of um, individual freedoms. And I suppose over time, I guess I read it this morning, so I love seeing it, kind of come up and regurgitating it. But that is, we want equal starting lines, not equal finishing lines. I think everybody should have the chance to be a success in life, but not everybody's going to put that same effort into their life. And so I think give everybody those opportunities, but at the same time, not equal outcomes. I think we have to realize that everybody is going to succeed at their own abilities and their own effort levels. And that's kind of what I would just want to see in life for my children. For my wife and I, we own a small business. It's not huge. We're never going to be millionaires, but at the same time, we're valuable members, I think, in our community. My wife teaches a lot of kids. I've been involved in government and tried to do what I can to help households save more money so they can do what they want, have that freedom. So I guess I'm feeling very happy about where the world is right now, but we have to be ever vigilant. So as you see behind me, I have a thing called the Real Deal Report. I try to write I do write a monthly column in the Boston Broadside newspaper. And I'm going to try to turn this into what you're doing, which is sort of a podcast just to interview folks who are involved in the fight. Because I think there is a lot we have to keep an eye on when it comes to those who would change the system to more government control and just telling us what we should do. And I don't buy into that.
Nice. No, that's awesome. And I appreciate your efforts with the Real Deal report in the broadside. I mean, that's getting some awesome exposure as well. So I'm a big fan of the RTCs. Let me put it this way. I'm a big fan of their potential. Okay. Some are run differently than others. I mean, it's all up to the CEO, just like any entity that's out there, nonprofit or whatever. So we were able to connect in April of this year at an RTC meeting in Hanson, I think it was, right? So a couple things on that. First of all, there were some great speeches, yourself included, with some great candidates. And I mean, one quick question is there something in the water in the South Shore down there that's a very strong, conservative Trump territory? I want to, ask that first, like what's going on? Because how do we clone that would be the question.
Well, David, where are you in the South Coast region?
So I live in Stowe, but I have a family
Oh
home.
no, sorry, you're up. Yep, you're up more north, west, Metro West type of area.
Yeah,
Got
there's
it.
a family home in Pembroke, actually. Yeah.
So what's interesting is the South Coast is starting to turn into a real, like, I'm going to say MAGA, but a Trump stronghold. You know, Fall River for the first time in 100 years voted for the Republican presidential nominee. Lawrence up on the north it's trending more and more to the middle, and this time it almost was just barely left of center, which is a future win for I think conservatives and Republicans in the state. But I always it's funny ever since I sort of realized and from the gas tax ballot question, I had a chance to travel across the state to speak at events, and then Trump in 15 and 16, and then running for U.S. Senate in 18 and running for governor in 22. I travel the state a lot. And so I do know what you're saying as far as having strong Republican town committees. Worcester has some very strong RTCs out there. They produced a lieutenant governor, Karen Polito. Those are sort of the evidence you see when you have a strong area is they produce either candidates or office holders that are able to make a difference. And the reason, for example, I was able to do the ballot question and then run for governor and for U.S. Senate was because as you mentioned, the Whitman-Hanson area and this region, the South Shore region, is actually pretty conservative. And so they would elect me and allow me to go to Beacon Hill to take on the big fights. They wouldn't expect me to try to get money for a statue in the town park. They would expect me to go up there and try to win on the big issues. And that allowed me to have a voice that really resonated more across the state. So when you have those solid pockets, you'll see stronger leaders emerge from that. When the conservatives are united and continue to put that same candidate back into office for a period of time, it allows that candidate to hone their skills, understand more about policy, make the relationships, get more media training in order to do that. So a strong RTC, to go back to your original point, absolutely makes all the world of difference because they'll have your back when you're out in the Berkshires trying to speak in Pittsfield, or you're trying to make the case up in Billerica, which by the way is another good conservative area. So I would say, ironically, the leadership for the national, or not the national, for the state party tends to be the North Shore. So you've got Bruce Tarr, Senate minority leader, and you've got Brad Jones, House minority leader, both up in that North Shore area, up Reading, Gloucester area, that sort of Cape Ann area. That's sort of where they reside. And also you see Mass GOP leadership tends to come from that region. So for some reason, an area that's more of a moderate Republican ends up sort of benefiting, gets the fruits of all this conservative movement around the state, because they'll get in, stay in, and then they'll become sort of the leadership. However, I think the leadership we need to match the base of the party, which really overwhelmingly voted for Trump in primaries. When I ran this last time for governor, I won the state convention with 71% of the vote. My opponent had voted for Hillary Clinton. That's how crazy, the moderate Republicans are, is that they actually think that you need to be a Democrat light to run, win, and serve the state. And I don't agree with that. I'm not a fan of Charlie Baker and what he did in office, especially at the end, where he was the lockdowns kept our kids in school with masks on for way too long. His energy policy that's put us on a net zero, which is completely unrealistic and unaffordable. There was a lot of problems with a moderate Republican governor. And I know that people want to paint someone like myself as far right wing, or anybody who's affiliated with Trump as radical. We're not. We're actually probably as close to center as you can get. But this state has moved so far to the left, and so many Republicans abandon their principles to stay in office, that we have real problems trying to get representation that matches I'd say, our ideals. So to wrap this all up, I would, if I'm going to grade the areas, I will say I'll give like the Worcester area the A for having like the most consistent Republican sort of push. I'll give the South Shore, right, a grade right behind them. We are always, I think, the workhorses of this state. I'll give the Cape like that next grade. They fight hard. They don't win a lot because there's anchors like P-Town, which really keep Democrats sort of in control. And the Cape and Islands, I'm sorry, the islands, especially Martha's Vineyard tends to vote heavy Democrat. So if snowbirds aren't around by the time it's time to vote, they go to Florida. Then we end up losing some of these races in November that ideally we would win on the Cape and Islands. So I'm going to give them a 3. The North Shore, maybe a 4. And where we really need work, though, is out in Western Massachusetts, the Berkshires area, Springfield. It is so tough. And I'm not going to say like Tanglewood or all that stuff that the arts that goes on in the summer. What that does is it draws a lot of liberal elite to buy homes from Connecticut and New York. They'll buy homes in Western Massachusetts to be around, James Taylor playing every summer. And so what happens is it's gotten very liberal out in far Western Massachusetts. It shouldn't be, because to me, that sort of almost matches the Pennsylvania coal country. It's a lot of labor, and they've been and the old paper factories have been turned into condos for $800,000 because they're right on a river. And so again, they're getting gentrified in further and further into lower income regions of that state. They should be voting Republican, but they don't get. My last big complaint is the media. They don't get much media coverage to begin with out in Western Mass. Some of their news comes from Albany, and so they don't really know what's going wrong in Boston with the tea or other things. Anyway, I think we need to do a lot of work out in Western Mass. Let's put it that way.
So I appreciate that overview of kind of the state of the state, if you will. The RTC. So I was a former chair of the Stowe RTC. I think I did it I was like 2021 or something like that, whenever it was. But I looked at that. I have a Wall Street background, MBA in entrepreneurship, blah blah blah. So I look everything as a case study. Like either I'm absorbing it as a student or teaching it. So I looked at that RTC as an opportunity to do a couple of things. One is to get people to run for elected positions, but even more importantly and easily, or more simple, I guess, is the layer under that, which is the volunteer on the committees, almost like a bench. So I really tried to encourage people to volunteer for finance committee bench, you know what I mean? In case people don't want to run. So that's a key. And the other thing I was trying to do is utilize the RTC as almost like a policy think tank with some teeth. So you have an RTC meeting, what are the current issues in the city or town? And then you get people on those boards, and then you bring them back to the RTC meeting and, okay, how are we going to vote? How do we, feel about this different issue? So that's kind of the way I did it. And a little bit of success here and there. But just to tie it back to the RTC meeting in Hanson, there were some great speeches. So and these were candidates. So Ed Diehl for the Select Board, Glenn DeGravio School Committee, Steve Kloutman School Committee, and Justin Robertson, young guy for Planning Board. So I think a few of those individuals got in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Ed, Glenn, and Steve got in, if I'm not mistaken.
Unfortunately, Steve didn't make it, and it's pretty ironic. He was the only member of the school board. So it's a regional school board. So you have members from Hanson and Whitman. He's from Hanson. He was already on the school board, was running for re-election, was
Okay.
the only one to vote against the school board budget, which then caused both towns to have to go to override votes.
Okay.
Both towns ended up voting against the overrides. So he was actually the only guy who actually stood on principle and was against it from the beginning. And yet the town did not connect him with the fact that they were voting against the override,
Gotcha.
and so he didn't get back in. I think part of that, and I don't want to get into
Of
too
course.
much specifics here, but
Of course.
is that sometimes RTCs don't necessarily have the funds or the ability to market a candidate well enough. Steve was also conservatives. I hate to say this, tend to not toot our own horns too much, and so he should have been probably more vocal about um, how proud he was about taking that vote against a budget that was unsustainable for both towns. But he's a very, kind of guy that leads by example, not by bragging. And that happens to Republicans. You end up losing because Democrats are pretty shameless about taking credit for a lot of things, and we don't. So that's just a small, example. But yes, generally we were successful in Hanson and in Whitman. We were able to vote against that override, which was good. But by the way, and it's funny you say this, David, is because I was saying this at the town committee about 2 weeks before we ended up helping put out signs for no on the override in Whitman, and I said to the town committee, because there's just a handful of us that were able to put in the time and energy to volunteer to help with it. I said, why does it always fall incumbent upon the Republicans of our town and towns across the state to have to be the voice against the override? It really isn't a partisan issue, but there's no real organization in towns. It's hard to find an organization that 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 does a fiscal pushback or questions spending other than the Republican Party. So we always end up getting sort of picture painted as the folks that are no against things, but we're not really against things. Government has to be in place. You have to fund certain parts of your town budget. The fact of the matter is, just when it goes off the rails, that's when we tend to step up and do more of our part. But why does it have to be the Republicans that are the ones that are always sort of there to say, hey, no on the spending? Why can't Democrats sometimes say, hey, wait a minute, I think we're getting out of control? But that party, I feel, and this is a bigger national issue, is so hijacked by a policy of increased government spending and creating more dependency on government services that even the local Democrat town committees are unable to fight that national thing. Because if any one of those local Democrats wants to run for state rep or for statewide office in Massachusetts, they're going to be judged on not trying to save money, but how much they could spend or how much control they could exact. We have a local selectman who was very proud to create the bag ban, the plastic bag ban at our Stop and Shop. And those are just telltale signs of people who are all about government control over your lives. And that's their calling card, is sort of more government, bigger, more expensive government. And so Republicans, I guess, by nature have to be that check in the balance system. But sometimes it really sort of makes me crazy that we always have to be the ones to be the adults in the room, and then we get blamed for it afterwards. You get called everything under the book. You don't care about the kids in schools. No, we care about all that, but we care about doing it in a responsible manner that creates a long-term success plan.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think in many respects we need to toughen up and just be a little bit more aggressive and professional and respectful, but turn the heat up a little bit where appropriate. So that leads me to my next sort of category. In terms of the Mass GOP, I mean, we watch it over the years, highs, lows, et cetera, small organization, clearly. But in your view, like, what's the state of the Mass GOP at this point? And, obviously we have some elections coming up, next year. And, where do we stand in your view at this point?
Well, again, I think we're sort of struggling with the same thing that's been a problem for Trump in his first term, which was getting Republican unity behind what we would say would be core Republican beliefs. Again, a reduction in government control of our lives, reduction in government spending. I think in Massachusetts, we have Republicans that serve on Beacon Hill, most notably our minority leader, Brad Jones, who actually actively worked against some of the members in the House caucus, his minority caucus, to try to get roll calls on amendments to cut spending or to stop, to create policy that would work, that our law enforcement would work with ICE, for example, to try to get illegals deported. And he basically blocked the ability to get a roll call on that, which then leaves the Democrats able to rerun for office without ever having sort of been exposed for their belief that ICE is wrong. So we have a divided party, and it's hard to figure out when this is going to end up working itself out. Um, to simplify it, I would say if you call it the establishment Republicans, they tend to have the money, a smaller group, but the money. And then you have the activist grassroots, the folks that were big Trump supporters. They're the ones who can get candidates to run, get them, elected, or at least through the convention to be a candidate. And then, unfortunately, the money can kind of shoot it down, and you end up having a stalemate where nobody ends up winning the general election. We have zero members of Congress that are Republicans in Massachusetts, right? Two senators and nine congressmen and women that are all Democrat. Then we have every single statewide office, constitutional office, is a Democrat. Governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer, auditor, all of them, attorney general, all of them are Democrats. Republicans have no foothold or training ground to, and because I say that because a lot of Republicans or Democrats, I'm sorry, end up having worked previously for a senator or a congressman or a governor, and then they run for office. They understand the mechanisms by which government runs, and they can run. And they have some name recognition in their regions, things like that. We don't have any foothold, so we have to do what you're doing, David, which is use the RTCs as a training ground or a bench to get people to run. And it's harder to push up than it is to come down, go from the top down. And so I think we're at a long-term stalemate of within the party. And I think, unfortunately, Washington, D.C., and I go down there, like I said, pretty much monthly. I'm heading down in about a week. I've met with the NRSC, National Republican Senate Committee. I've met with National Governors Association. I've met with the co-chair of the National Party just a few weeks ago. Nobody seems to have any interest in trying to invest in the Massachusetts turnaround, and that's a problem. And I get it. Like, we have a very thin margin in the House down in DC, and we need that in order to get the Trump agenda to pass. So much so that Elise Stefanik could not become UN ambassador. She had to give that up and stay in the House to make sure that we had the votes to pass the great big beautiful bill, which is going to create, I think, probably one of the most. I think my kids are about to go through what we thought back in the day, David. I'm sure you thought Reagan, nobody could outdo the 80s. I think that the next 10 years are going to be some of America's most productive years that we'll ever live through in our lives. And I'm 56. I think by 65, when I'm ready to retire, our country is going to be in such incredibly great shape, and my kids will have a future again, something that I was truly worried about over the last 12 years. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. My point is, I don't see DC coming to our rescue. And I think what we have to try to do is come to an understanding that when you have an activist that's running for office and they win the primary, everybody should get behind that person. Vice versa, if like Charlie Baker, when he won in the nomination in 10 and then in 14 before he became governor, everybody got behind him because we needed a governor badly. Everybody did. But when I became the nominee for Senate and governor, Baker and his people were not there to help me. And I don't say that, I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me. That is the problem. They don't necessarily want to reform government like I want to reform government, and therefore there's distrust, and therefore there is a sabotage that goes on when an activist tries to win. But I do think that our state will see the success that we're seeing nationally if we can elect I'm not going to say a populist, but someone who understands that they have to make at least turn the state of ship from the leftward, you know, tack that it's on to at least a right of center when it comes to fiscal policy, public safety, and to me, two of the nominees or two of the people vying to be the nominees come from Baker's cabinet. I don't see how that's going to make a dime's worth of difference up on Beacon Hill. There's a third person, Michael Minot, who has yet to announce. He hosted J.D. Vance in 2024 before the election here in Massachusetts. I believe that he would be fully in line with what the policy is down in D.C. that Trump's trying to push here in Massachusetts. So I'm I'm hoping he decides to make the run. I'm curious to see what he has to say once he is on the campaign trail. I hope he stays true to those ideals. But until if it's not this cycle, until we have a candidate who really is willing to take the hits that you're going to get from the media, the mainstream media, from the establishment, Republicans and the Democrats, we're going to be in a permanent sort of cycle of morass. I don't even know what the word is. And unfortunately, we're losing good Republicans because a lot of them who own businesses are moving to the Carolinas, they're moving to Florida. So we're having an exodus of the people who actually care. And, this may be very well our last few cycles before Massachusetts becomes really hopelessly stuck in and becomes just, I guess I hate to say it. I almost feel like the National Republicans use Massachusetts as a poster child. It's either California or Massachusetts when they try to point out examples of just radical left policy that's terrible. And then we produce candidates like Elizabeth Warren ran for president. I don't think people remember this. She came in third in Massachusetts. That's how bad of a candidate she was. But those folks feel like their crazy policy is deserving of a national stage and possibly even winning that presidency. And I think Maura Healey, for a while there, was thinking that she would be on track to become potentially a presidential nominee. And I think that is absolutely the most outlandish thing I've ever heard. But here we are in Massachusetts, where the media, the Boston Globe, will happily run that story to give her a shot.
Unbelievable. So let's zoom in a little bit. So 2026, it's, good year away plus, right? Plenty of time to do something. The good news, I'm always looking for positives, right? Big Tony Robbins fan, right? All these motivational speakers that helped me out over the years. But anyway, I was vice chair for the Trump campaign last year for Get Out the Vote. That was my first campaign I ever worked on. Worked my tail off, not knowing what I was doing as usual, but that's okay. And we had a 8.8% move to the right, as you know. And so that's good stuff, right? I've never done a standout in my entire life. I probably did 20 last year, whatever the number was. But I got to tell you, though, just the excitement of being around those people that were like us, just regular people, and motivated, passionate, positive, smiling. So that's very hopeful. So to zoom in on the campaigns for next year, we have a Senate race, Ed Markey. He's 80-ish. I don't know, exact age or whatever. He's been in that spot since 2013. He's got $2 million of cash, which must be a very nice feeling, by the way.
You're kind to say 2013 because he's also been in Congress for decades before that.
Okay.
He's been down in D.C. for so long that I don't think he even remembers what his Massachusetts address, his mother's address is that he uses to say he's from the state. But anyway.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if I want to use the word vulnerable, right? But I mean, to some extent, if you look at it from a logical perspective, like good versus bad chart, there's a whole bunch on the negative side. And then on the positive side for him, it's Massachusetts, right? So there you go. But I think, if we get someone in there that can hustle and speak the truth and will work their tail off, I mean, maybe there's a shot at least, kind of putting him on the defensive. What are your thoughts on that race specifically?
So, I think what one of the candidates, or the only candidate I know that seems to be interested, is John Deaton, who ran already last 2 years ago against Elizabeth Warren. So in Massachusetts, people may not know this, but a Senate term is 6 years. And so what that ends up happening is there's a gap year between there's a gap year when you don't vote. I say gap year, a gap cycle when you don't vote for U.S. Senate. So we had Elizabeth Warren 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, whatever it was, and we have Markey coming up in 2026. And then we're going to have 2028, there's nobody, and then it'll be Elizabeth Warren up again. And so um, this is kind of our last shot for 4 years to get somebody in to the Senate. Now, you're right. Massachusetts is an automatic home field advantage for the Democrats. It's the Fenway Park for the Sox, right? But it is also an environment where right now, nationally, the Democratic Party is failing to put forth anybody that's sort of galvanizing the party to, behind some leadership. And the fact is, the Senate right now is being Trump has not just the White House, but he has a Senate majority and a House majority. I don't think anybody projects right now the Democrats taking back control of the Senate in this next 2026 election cycle. In fact, I believe three Democratic senators have just retired, and it's going to be all they can do to try to just hold those seats as Democrats right now. And so for them, it's very unlikely they're going to put any money into the race behind Markey. They usually expect a Massachusetts Democrat to do it on their own, especially when they are playing defense. If they had a majority and they were just trying to seal the deal in certain states, and Markey said he was in trouble, they might send some money this way. But could be one of those years, like when Scott Brown beat Martha Coakley. The Democrats sort of weren't expecting a Republican surge. They didn't plan for it. They didn't field a good team out in the across the state to support her. And Scott Brown was somebody that I don't think I learned at his feet back in 2010 when he won that race. That was a precursor to us winning. We doubled our number of state reps in the House in Massachusetts that year from 16 to 32. Scott Brown was a big part of that because it put a lot of extra wind in sails like mine to go, we can win this if we work hard like Scott did. Scott told me a story when he was when I first met him. He gave me a check for $100, said good luck, and told me about how when he ran for state rep at first, because he was a rep, then he became a state senator, and then became a U.S. senator. But when he was a rep, he was also serving in the National Guard, and he was used to exercising. He put on his guard pack, put literature in his backpack, and literally ran to every single door of every house in that state rep district. Now, a state senate district is so much bigger, you could never do that. But a state rep district, he did it, and was always so proud to be able to say that he stopped at every door when he ran for that first seat in the legislature. And that just stuck with me. I said, man, if he can do it, I can do it. And this just flashes back to my original story. If you're thinking about running for a select board seat, which is just one town, or city council seat, one city, or you're thinking about running for a state rep seat, you can actually go to your local town assessor's office, get a map of all the streets, right? And I laminated them, put them on the foam board, used a dry erase pen, and every day after I got home from work, I'd head out to a street and I'd cover that street, and I'd do the literature and cover that street and ask if they'd want a lawn sign. And by the time I ran for almost 2 years. That I used most of the 2 year cycle to run. By the time I was ready for the election day, all three of those maps every street was covered, having walked down the streets. Now, not everybody can give that sort of time. My wife, thank God, she was able to watch our two daughters at home. We work different hours of the day, so I could do my job during the day. At night, I drag my daughters to political events and stuff like that. And they hated me for it. But the fact is, getting face to face with all those people made a huge difference. Scott Brown was someone who understood what retail politics was all about. Massachusetts needs candidates who understand retail politics. Being a billionaire or millionaire that can throw a ton of ads on the air, that may get you so far, but you have to take it across the finish line by really going across the state, canvassing it over and over again, having a good campaign team that understands where our strengths are in the state versus our weaknesses, and sending you to those areas that you're weak, because you got to get your name recognition up. But we can win. We just need to be unified. So again, circling back to the main question, is the Mass GOP leadership in a position right now? Financially, they're not. I think we have more debt than we have assets on the books. I think it's going to take candidates who can self-finance or know how to raise money. I'm not a millionaire. I never put I mean, I put money into my own races, but for U.S. Senate, for governor, I had to raise $2 or $3 million for each race by making phone calls every single day. You have to know how to raise money. And so what we need is that bench, like you're talking about, somebody who's gotten into office, knows the ins and outs of government as far as policy and procedure, but then also has that retail element of being able to explain face to face with people what they're about and why it's going to benefit them. And then on top of it, have that ability to raise money and sort of get leadership in the region or statewide to get everybody together and win that big push. So my wife and I are both on state committee because we've been doing it for 15 years. We know success, we know failure. We want to transfer that knowledge to the next candidate that we think can do it. And we're going to stay at it till I get to be at the swearing in of a governor that I trust and know will be like a Trump for Massachusetts, someone who is going to look top to bottom at every dollar we spend and say, is this really benefiting us as a state or not? And I know that day is coming soon. It's just a matter of when. Is it going to be under President Trump? Is it going to be under President Vance? I don't know. We'll see.
Excellent. No, that's great. So, we only have a couple of minutes left. Geoff, first of all, I want to say thank you for everything you're doing, and
My
thank
pleasure.
you for joining the Mass MAGA podcast. So, as a former professor, I like to give homework, whether people like it or not. So, what advice, and just kind of a final question, but what advice would you give to individuals that want to get in this space at this point? What?
Oh, I was just looking. I'm sorry. I'm in front of my library and I'm looking at my books here, and I have two books on how to run for office. I should have had them out before. I suppose I can try to put them online at some point. Oh, here they are. Yes, here they are. Sorry.
No problem.
This is the beauty of podcasts, or
Yeah,
is that we can actually be in our home offices.
I love
I
it.
literally bought these two books. One is called How to Run for Local Office,
Okay.
and by Robert Thomas. Okay, I think he may be a judge. I forget. And the second book I had was How to Win a Local Election. Okay, and I don't know. I did the old college. I mean, I went through this and notated it like I was in college again at 40 years old.
Love
I
it.
took both books. I synthesized all my notes and combined them, and I have this binder that just became my Bible on what I was doing. It's fairly simple, though. You look at the election day and you work your way back on a calendar to today, and you say, "Here's all the timelines or the milestones I have to hit," and you just do the work every day. Now that's kind of like success in life
Yeah.
kind of advice, but um, it, the advice I would give is if it's not these books, at least talk to someone like me, an old hand, who's going to tell you sort of the shortcut of how to do that. And then join your local RTC. Make sure that you have that support network in place. Um, and then don't rush. This takes a while to build up credibility and trust and knowledge. You're not going to win your first election. Usually, that's not always the case. Incumbents tend to win 70 to 80% of the races in the state. If it's an open seat, that's a different equation. But don't feel like it's got to happen overnight, the success. This is a long-term commitment. I've been since I was 40 and now I'm 56, 15, 16 years of being politically aware and starting to get active. It's something that's going to take a while for you to fully absorb the movement at the front level of politics and everything that happens behind the scenes. And once you do understand it, I guess that next level advice is don't get discouraged, don't quit, stick with it, because too many people are good candidates, good political workers that get frustrated. They go through two or three cycles without a win of themselves or the person they're supporting. They say, "I'm done. I forget this." Don't give up. It's that persistence that ultimately leads to the win, and the win is worth it. You may not feel on the surface like you're winning when you pick up a state rep seat, because it's not one of the it's one out of 160 seats, and it's a super majority that the Democrats have over those. But one of those state reps could stand up, get something passed with a ballot question or something, and create the movement that allows for the next good candidate to come along and maybe win that bigger seat, that governor's seat or AG seat or something significant. So we need to win something statewide. We need to win something that's a federal office. But I think we're on track to do it. It's just a matter of when, so long as everybody from the MAGA movement continues to believe. And I'll tell you, I guess, David, the one thing I'll say is because you've been there supporting Trump, you know that guy could have quit at any moment. He had the money. He was being destroyed personally with his reputation in the media. The lawfare was trying to destroy him financially, his family, and he never gave up. And I'll tell you what, he is an inspiration now, I think, to just about anybody who believes in our American political system. And I think he's going to go down as one of the greatest presidents. You may not on the surface understand him, but once you start seeing the genius of what he's done, the people he's put together, and the fact that he's stuck with it, that to me is everything. So persistence and believing in this whole thing, I think that's just you can't help but win.
Terrific. Geoff, thank you so much for your time. For everyone in the Mass MAGA community, if you want to participate, please go to massmaga.com. You can submit RTC information, candidate information, or any online resources as well. Geoff, thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch very soon.
Look forward to seeing you again soon, David. Thank you.
Bye-bye.